Yeah, thank you, Ivana, for this kind of conclusion, which I think it's really a good start for our discussion. I would like to thank also Aljosa for his contribution on the potential of education on site in terms of outlining the local specificity and kind of seeding the new specific touristic experiences, and also to Phineas to somehow really challenge us as architects of what do we build, how do we build, to readdress the issue of the resources, but also opening up the potential of the ritual, which was also opened up, further continued with the Aljosa on. So maybe Jakob asked me to start the discussion because he's compiling questions from the YouTube. I somehow made certain notes, and all of you referred to the current position of where we stand now. And I think there were enormous amount of questions somehow opened, and we need to somehow define from, we need to start speaking from one moment on. What I could somehow summarize from everything together was actually this, let's say, carbon footprint, which was spoken by John first on the food production in relationship to the tourism, and then later on it was also addressed by Phineas, and of course also with Ivana, and hi Maya for joining us to the discussion. So I think what we have now in this situation where our restriction for travel, restriction for consumption in many ways, although online consumption continues to go on, we have an opportunity to really rethink either the taxes or the issues on the food miles, travel miles, good miles. And I would like, John, maybe if you can extend on these issues, because these were your core presentation. Where do you see the potentials of that throughout this particular moment? How could we use this unique opportunity not to go back to where we started?
So I should begin my short answer by saying I have no idea what's going to happen, so I don't have a strategy, short-term or long-term, for the big picture. But even before the crisis that we're in now, my approach has been that in general, systems don't change because you tell them to. They change because of changes to reality, which can be very small, and they can be very like fringe in the normal course of events. So my basic attitude and expectation is to look for the positive actions that people are taking, even within the crisis of the lockdown and the constrained mobility, and see how what we can do either to connect those experiments to something somewhere else, or to help them to do better, become richer and deeper, and so on. I love the presentation about the crafts in one street, because that to me is a very good example. I didn't talk about the kind of maker side of the economy, but looking at resources in one street of Zagreb that has, you know, equipment, people, tools, history, culture, memory. It's such a rich resource. And I can imagine, I'm desperate now to get hold of the book, but I can imagine that most of that value and potential is not recognized even by the people in the street, never mind more broadly. So one of the things that I think designers can do is to say, hey, there's fantastic potential here of this workshop, this machine, these three individuals with their skills. Let's see if we can give them some new tasks or some new activities. And I think that applies to right across the board to what happens going forward.
Thank you so much. Before I give the word to Maya and Ivana, I just would like to accentuate that actually this is a 6-year-old continuous work of the collaborative Oaza on that particular street, which involves, probably you will enlighten us how many hours of your work, but also it was not just a seed, because a lot of positive actions usually start and highlight certain issues. But from what I remember from the first 2 years and onwards, we were able to change the local economy of those people who you highlighted their knowledge and expertise, and whom you kind of conducted the workshops on the street of Ilica. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, Ivana and Maya?
Well,
Hi, Maya.
hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Maybe just to have a short comment on both your question, Tina, and John's comment. It is a continuous work, and it's also sort of a very elaborate way of basically building relationships with these people. And it took years to actually establish mutual trust in its essence, which allowed for any of these activities to actually take place. And of course, that a notion of giving them some sort of an economic or other types of independence was in our kind of back of our mind. But since this kind of thing requires a lot of support from a structural level, from governmental or city councilling or any kind of institutions that are involved with supporting crafts in this case were necessary. In that sense, we were basically just mediators and highlighting these stories at the beginning. It was only through gallery activities, through exhibitions, through something that was close to us as being practitioners of design. But as time went by, of course, it turned into a model on its own, basically, which enabled us to actually reach out to other institutions, to museums and to other NGOs. And it basically pinpointed and showed that there are many initiatives, performing artists, sociologists, different groups of citizens who are doing this kind of groundwork and activist work on the ground. And it was easier to engage once we knew that there was a broader network of participants. And of course, highlighting these issues is not the sole response that we had. We knew that just highlighting them and giving them a bit of more media coverage is not going to be enough. But to start with building community and with starting to building this kind of conversation, it was enough to highlight them in such a way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maya. So, Aljosa and Finn, you were speaking about rituals. Maybe, Aljosa, how do you see these kind of temporary events of visiting school, which are 2 or 3 weeks long in different parts of the world? How are those seeds or those projects who are actually delivered by the students, but they also have some sort of strategies of how they could be long-lived? Is this happening, or if not, what do you think is the reason that they don't have the future as the old school Ilica turned into made in Ilica?
Well, first, I think what we are doing with the visiting school, it is a form of nanotourism on its own. So we are practically, we have been, well, first years semi-visitors, semi-locals in a way. But then when we traveled around the world, we were visitors, understanding those specific places with communities from a completely different perspective and different type of engagement as somebody would travel in general. To answer the other part of your question, being a 14 days course, it is something that resonates also to what Maya, you were saying, that it took kind of years in order to build trust, in order to create, let's say, a proposal or a project or attitude that you were creating to be part of everyday life in the local community. So I think, well, simply technically speaking, 14 days, it's not enough to kind of build trust. You simply are given an opportunity to open up questions and potentials. And then if that would be a persistent process, that would probably kind of grow together. But it also needs to be said that those experimental student projects are not kind of finished products on their own when we kind of do them or leave the place over there. Of course, they can also take in so many different forms further on in local environments. They can be changed. I mean, they are bound to be changed because they have to adapt to environment and social structure that obviously changes through time. So in that sense, it is a living organism that simply kind of persists through time.
I think since you always collaborate with local partners who never actually go there and do the top-down approach to the space, it would actually mean that the local partners or the communities where you instigate that would perpetually continue the work that Oaza is doing in Zagreb. And I think this is then what it really takes enormous amount of stamina and enormous amount of energy each year to somehow continue that. But I think also these seeds of rituals are really important. And of course, what you mentioned, that the students who are able to travel in this way are engaged in the local place in culture in a completely different way than if they would be superficial travelers. I think today what happens, and then also Ivana mentioned that we, through these last weeks of somehow stay at home / social distancing, we somehow found the ritual or rituals that we never did before in our streets or homes. So do you think, Phineas, this ritual is something, or extensive set of rituals is going to stay for a little bit longer, or would be just basically a thing for the summer 2020? Mike, turn on the mic, please.
I think it already is here. It's just not, it's not widespread. I mean, if you think about any indigenous community, they're not like reaching for Ryanair and EasyJet to sort of scratch their itch. I think there's a lot that we as the kind of developed middle class West could be learning from the ways that our kind of fellow humans have something that is kind of similar to holiday, right? Similar to what we do for our holidays. And actually, even just within the developed West, if you look at different kind of socioeconomic groups, people who have less money tend to expend less carbon in the way that they go on holiday, right? I was very struck when I went to architecture school, which I did in Wales, in Cardiff, and I'd ask people, just sort of getting to know them, like, where are you from, what's, you know, and I'd ask sort of, what's your favorite city, as a kind of question to sort of get a sense of what my peers were like. And all these architecture students would say, oh, I like New York, oh, I like Tokyo, oh, I like, you know, Singapore, I like Moscow. None would say I like Manchester, or I like Leeds, or I like Edinburgh. Like they instinctively were reaching for very, very far-flung places. And actually, I got the sense that they'd never explored locally. Like they hadn't been to the cities of their own country where they were born and lived for their entire lives. They couldn't tell you the difference between Liverpool and Manchester, for example, which are two cities in the UK. They're very close together, but both are very big and dynamic places. But, you know, they're posh middle-class architects. Like, that's not a sort of condition that's universal. So I think with the question of, like, will we go back to normal? Who we are is quite an important kind of word in that question. And I have been massively encouraged by seeing people locally kind of discovering joy in much smaller things than they would have maybe considered previously. So like realizing that actually there are some kind of charming parks near their house that they can play in, and they don't have to travel across London to the bigger, more glamorous parks. Realizing that you know, you can do small things at home, like playing chess. And I think there has been a kind of a weird gear shift where people have realized that some of these things they've written off for essentially taste prejudice, out of taste prejudice, are actually quite charming and quite nice. And maybe as we kind of emerge from the lockdown, I'd be hoping to kind of hold on to some of those bits of culture. I mean, there's sort of the like the stereotype of people baking bread is all over Instagram and is a little bit annoying. But on the other hand, wouldn't it be fascinating if we all got better at cooking as a result of the lockdown, and were therefore like more able to invite friends round for meals and kind of socialize in a domestic setting without always having to resort to going out to a restaurant or a pub and kind of participating in a formal economy in order to socialize. So yeah, I think there's lots of like really small things that we could do differently, but I actually think a lot of them are already happening, and it's just a case of amplifying them rather than inventing new things.
Yeah, so to me what was fascinating is that in 2014, when we asked the research team to involve and research their own street and their own home, so in their immediate surrounding, with the ways that they never did before, it was an experiment. And then in the COVID situation, it was actually an experiment for everyone, regardless of how much money they have, regardless of their background, knowledge, and everything. So I think this is a unique opportunity to really kind of hold on to this kind of discoveries now. Also, I think what was really beautiful is that a lot of people who live in this kind of capital cities, which are also tourist traps in certain way, we enjoyed kind of walking around empty streets, which they were never empty. And of course, kind of amplifying on this particular thing. So that was one thing. But on the other hand, what you said about not knowing your own country, not in nationalistic way, but the cities where you grew up or a region. I think what is fascinating now is that countries are now calling for this summer for people to stay within their countries in order to spend their holidays. This was a call from France, also Germany, not to travel abroad. Of course, these are only economic reasons for that, but I think it will be a suggestion, and also to the polls that I searched through, it was obvious that more people would stay within their own countries this summer than they have ever been in the last decade. So this will be an opportunity to open your eyes and see where you come from, because I think even younger generation, they didn't even know. They traveled abroad first before traveling within their own region. So this might be happening either with the order, suggestion, or any other possibilities. John, did you want to say something before? Mike, please, Mike.
I don't think we should feel that we have to make a choice between, on the one hand, the visiting workshop concept, which all of us, I guess, have been involved with over years. I know I've done them for 25 years in various places. And I spent the last 10 years being frustrated that going somewhere for a week or 2 weeks is by definition an incomplete experience, because maybe you generate expectations and insights and understanding, but then where do they go? Where do you leave them? You take them away. It's all kind of very, episodic, but you can't expect people to kind of move permanently to, for example, to a country, village, or a rural situation. And so I've learned over the last period that city people very badly would like to have a longer term repeat relationship to places, so they're not going as total strangers every time. And so this notion of it takes time to build trust that we heard from, I think, from Maya earlier, it takes time to understand each other, but you don't all have to live together for the whole time to do that. So I really want to be serious about this. The governments of Europe are really going to be in a really desperate search for ways of generating activity that don't require vast amounts of money. And the work that we do in looking for potential in one street, in one village, in one farm, that's where the value is going to be created. So if we can find a way to explain to the Green New Deal people that we are the ones who make the Green New Deals, then I think that we have important work to be done.
Maybe just one more note regarding Ilica that keeps coming back. Two other things that were, I think, important in this trust to actually happen is to show people that they are invited to take part. Like somebody commented, people weren't taking notice of their surroundings. So maybe this parallel of shared experience such as COVID can be made, even if it's a bit far-fetched. But once they were invited to take part in something that's being produced and being made behind the courtyards that they are passing by on their daily commutes, this was an important thing to make. So to include the local residents, in fact, in contributing in some way, and to challenge their previous ways of consuming different kinds of content, and opting for something that's a bit further out, or that's being imported, or any other way. And by doing so, there was a newfound confidence for people, for residents of this street, to actually take some form of pride in what's being made there. So this confidence and this lack of confidence that was now replaced with the project such as this was something that I believe made a difference in the local community.
Jakob, would you like to ask certain questions from the YouTube so we can continue and wrap up the discussion? Jakob, you need to turn on the mic.
The usual Zoom issue. I mean, there's really a lot of questions, so it's very difficult to kind of squeeze it in. Maybe one question that could relate to this topic of rituals was how, and I think this is an open question, how do you see the possible parallels of the maintenance of soft buildings with the maintenance of a soft tourism experience? So something that is not that is not inflicted, but something that is coming innately from the local environment.
Who's that aimed at? Sorry.
It's an open question, but it could also be, maybe Finn, if you start, because it relates to your architectural.
Well, I'm a big fan of inventing rituals, I guess. I don't know if all, you know, I personally find a huge amount of meaning in participating in traditions that have come before me and will be around after me, whether those are kind of workers' traditions or religious observances or whatever. I kind of love all that stuff, but I also think there's a role for inventing personal rituals. And I don't know, recently there's this piece of writing that describes maybe that Western Europe should have 6 seasons rather than 4 seasons, and the extra 2 seasons would be called locking and unlocking. And so we thought, okay, let's kind of let's stage a little dinner around the idea of a new season called unlocking, and we planted a tree, and then we passed a glass of water around in a circle and poured it on the tree, and then we passed like a handful of earth around, and so it was like a very simple process of just inventing a kind of silly game. But I'm planning to do it next year and the year after, and kind of over time building up something, because I agree with the sort of sentiment that these things take time, whether you're trying to earn trust with a community or learn about an area. There are no quick fixes, and what's been sort of so weird about the COVID thing is how fast we've all changed. But I think coming out of lockdown is probably a process that we want to kind of build the new society over time. So I guess I'm a fan of. I don't quite know if that answers your question, but like if it's a struggle to find examples of soft tourism, just invent some, like build some from scratch. You don't have to be a kind of consumer. You can also be a creator of these things.
Mm-hmm. 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 There was one question specifically also maybe to both Tina and Aljosa. if you can elaborate a bit on this prefix nano in nanotourism in regards to how that can help one to understand locality better or differently.
Aljosa, can you do that, please?
Well, firstly, I mean, I was saying at the beginning that alternative ways, creative ways of tourism, soft tourism, and all of things that we are discussing, they're not new. They have been around the world since a lot of time, and they're quite frequent when you start scratching the surface and you dig deeper. So I think it helps quite a lot to kind of name certain attitude in order to, well, promote it. Maybe it's not the right word for it, but at least to speak about it and to affirm it, to start share it and understand it. So when Tina and I started to think about that together with Jakob so many years ago, we were also kind of understanding how, well, we were understanding what we are speaking about also with naming it. So that's about, kind of a necessity of having a name for something that we all share and see value in. So secondly, to directly answer the question, what about nano? In certain way, it relates also to nanotechnology, which is the word that we are very familiar with, but not so directly in scale at all, but in the ability of nanotechnology to kind of work with invisible, let's say, processes, which are hidden under or in the bottom somewhere, in order to produce results or other processes which then kind of become visible. So in that sense, I see the word nanotourism as something that tries to tackle and work around with something which is kind of hidden. If you also remember the diagram I was showing that Jakob was producing of what is obvious and what is hidden. So to induce processes to bring the hidden to the foreground and to the surface in order to actively understand it and engage with it.
Yeah, so that it was very clear. So it's not about small tourism or tourism wanting to be small, but actually it's tourism that could emerge also on a mainstream level in a radical, let's say, format, but actually that starts as a bottom up, as a hidden process that you kind of impose within, not impose, but you develop with the local community and then continue, mature and adapt throughout.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps a final question. I think it could be directed to both the Oaza group and John. How does your practice mediate between nostalgia and the current reality in the perception of your everyday environment and objects that you use, or through the perception?
Ivana and Maya, you have to start.
Well, maybe I think I've mentioned it somewhere already in the presentation that actually this project that we are doing now is also about the preservation of knowledge. But at the same time, I mean, this system can be applicable to anything else. So actually what we are seeing here as crafts and something that is maybe romanticized and old, etc., can be applied to other levels of living. And I said at one point that I think craft can actually be any meaningful work, which basically enhances your skills and contributes to the community. there is one nice quote of Richard Sennett, who says that there are three basic abilities that are fundamental to craftsmanship if we take it on a broader level. It's ability to localize, to question, and to open up. So it's actually the ability to produce any good work in this sense. And also I also mentioned in the presentation, I think it's important to understand that not only crafts people in this old sense are capable of bringing this decentralization back to the individual, but also that any mode of engagement like we see with DIY culture also somehow contributes to this democratization and bringing the power back to the individual. So any technology can also today, if it's connected to mind and hands, can be also perceived as craft, or at least as a continuation of the craft, I think.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I do understand that people get very nervous about this, the danger of being sentimental about what was before. But I'm very confident. I have no idea what's coming in the near future, but I do know that a knowledge of materiality, a knowledge of place, a knowledge of tactile experience, a embodied experience, that has to be a part of the positive qualities that we want. So how we bring those into our lives, I don't know, but we need to find people who have those skills and those traditions and the knowledge and the tools that we don't have. They need to be part of the picture, not tell them what to do. But, you know, I want a typographer, I want a woodworker, I want a farmer, I want a doctor to be in the kind of picture of how our daily lives are organized, because they have skills and sensibilities that I don't have. So it's like being a curator. It's not that you tell everybody what to do. You say, look, we need a mixture of these qualities. And 9 times out of 10, these qualities already exist in our immediate surroundings. You know, that's just, you know, the ways that people care for each other or care for their places. That to me has been a complete revelation about this lockdown period. All the people in my immediate surroundings who have qualities I just never realized before. So yeah, we don't have to look very far, but so how it connects with tourism, I'm not sure, but it's about what I said right at the beginning of my own talk. It's looking at our places as places for potential, and then the skills that we have as designers and artists or whatever is to go and look for the potential and bring it together.
Yeah, I think, Jakob, you agree, maybe this comment is really kind of summative of our conversation. I would really like to thank each of you for your time, for sharing your thoughts, but also to listening to the others and for the commenting. I think we could speak for another hour or so, because all these things, the crisis was there, but it changed radically. And I think we somehow opened up the possibilities that this situation now, it's all kind of showing us the possible future in a different way. Of course, the seeds, if we will be able to implement them in a certain extent, it's either from us or from a larger community. So I think we are here to somehow promote that and really look into the places, the immediate surrounding and the immediate community for either for travel or for production, in order to somehow really benefit the planet in this moment, but also with this knowledge, even if the times are getting back to normal, I think we will understand the global situation completely different and behave globally different after we understand and appreciate what we have in our immediate, immediate surrounding.